like to welcome you to the session today, City Life, New Designs for an Urban Planet. And I'd like to thank you as we are going to sit down. We're going to discuss why cities remain not only important, but in particular, why they are centers of innovation, why they are centers of key ideas, and how it is that the template for cities, particularly here in Europe and even more particularly the UK, are a mechanism for addressing several of the key challenges both in the present and the future as to how we live, what it is specifically that we would like to see in our lifestyle in terms of our health, in terms of technological innovation, in terms of infrastructure, as we go forward in this century, and how it is that the cities here succeed, and the ways in which they succeed or fail are going to be a key determinant in terms of addressing major societal issues over the next few decades. Today I am joined by an excellent panel who have a number of different marvelous perspectives. And with me, if we start out going over, we will start on this side with Nicolaus Henke, who is here from McKinsey, who is an expert on all things health and, as it turns out, why it is that cities are so essential to that particular issue. Cockerton, who is founder and CEO and chairwoman of ENTIQ, is our innovator and specialist. Bridget Rosewell, who is Rosewell, my apologies, who's a founder and senior advisor of Volterra Partners, also happens to be the former chief economic advisor of the Greater London Authority, which gives her key knowledge in both the public and private aspects of what makes an excellent city and what occasionally does not. Then we have to our left we have oh yes, I'm actually looking for you. I'm misplacing the bio. No, that part I got. It's Duncan Swinhoe, who's the regional managing principal of Gensler, who is, in this particular case, can be our expert on what should be built, rebuilt, redesigned, and from an aspect of what makes an excellent city. And the reason also comes in is that there's an excellent transition between Duncan and James Goldsmith, who is on his left and our right, who's leasing director of real estate management, because he's the one who actually has to sell and fill up the properties once they've been effectively designed, and can tell what exactly the demand really is and what it is that businesses are truly looking for. So what I'd like to say today in that regard is that, first off, for Bridget, you're the one who really understands what are the key building blocks of a great city. Where do we start out?
Well, I think actually the building blocks for any city is connectivity. Connectivity and connectivity. So it's all about how people can get together, how businesses can get together, how a labour market can operate. So how do people get to work? How do children get to school? How do people get to shops, to leisure facilities, and all of those sorts of things? And in the process, they create an economy. And that's true for all cities. So the struggle has always been to get the right kind of investment into that. But what makes a great city is resilience. So what makes a great city is all this connectivity can happen, but it continues to happen when things are a bit going wrong. Actually, the medieval cities were so unhealthy that they had to continually suck people in because they died. So people died quicker than they arrived sometimes, and that was an unsuccessful city. If you could attract them in more quickly than they died, that was a growing city. So getting the health right and getting the resilience of your population and the resilience of your transport system right is, I think, the key to a great city. And there is a picture, actually, which is slide 4 of the slides, if somebody could pick that up, which illustrates what I mean, because it's got all of these elements in it. It's about London. It's the picture of the sewers being built by Bazalgette, not Peter Bazalgette, who designed a television programme, but his ancestor, who designed the sewers which were put in place after what's known as the Great Stink in London, which they thought caused cholera. It actually wasn't causing cholera, but it was the event which spurred, we have to do something about the drains. So he put in the drains. How did he do it? He worked out the worst, most polluting part, most effluent part of London, which was Westminster. That was the densest bit. He then assumed the rest of London was the same, which it wasn't, it was much less. And then he doubled it, because he wanted some spare capacity. So he had got that resilience in there, and it was a jolly good job, because we're only just now running out of this particular piece of infrastructure and having to put more tunnels down the Thames. But more than that, to the left of the sewage tunnels, you can see a train, I hope. So alongside that, he built the district line in London, so which runs along the embankment, and pushed the river back, built out the embankment. So created additional infrastructure even beyond that. So we have that connectivity story, allowing Londoners to get to work, but we also have the resilience story and the healthy story, all in one picture. So I'll leave it at that point.
Well, actually, the healthy story it makes an excellent transition to Nicolaus, because he's going to tell us particularly what it is that McKinsey has been finding about cities, and why is health so important, not just now, but with the way the demographics are going.
Thank you for that. Let me maybe start with some observations why cities by themselves are important before I turn to health, because we all sit here for looking at cities. And I think the astounding fact is that the connectivity we've just heard about creates an incredible effect, which is it creates economic growth of a kind, which is almost hard to do outside cities. If you listen to economists, they talk always about countries, but they talk about the next year and so on, and we had a perfect illustration of that this morning. If you kind of look at the unobserved heterogeneity about these kind of generic points, you sense that about only 1.5 billion people lived 2007 in the top 600 cities, and that will rise to 2 billion people. That's a quarter of the world population. But they will essentially create more than almost 60% of world GDP. So only 600 cities de facto dominate the world economy. And we've created at McKinsey Global Institute a data set of all cities, the top 2,000 cities, and analyzed these trends in some more detail. And a number of things are quite worth mentioning if you look at 2025. One is the mega cities, like those with 10 and more million inhabitants, are actually not going to, for the next decade, contribute majorly to the growth. They're actually slowly shrinking. What is really growing is the cities between 150,000 and 10 million people, kind of the next generation. They will actually be responsible, if you wish, the mid-sized cities in this top 600 will essentially constitute 45% of world growth for the next period until 2025, which is just an astounding fact. And it shows what happens if, it's exactly to your point, when people move from unconnected to connected, big growth happens, which I think is important lessons for us to take away. But some other more worrisome things happen at the same time. We are seeing that the size of households is declining. So the number of households is growing much faster than the number of people, which causes huge strain on infrastructure, which again we see. And this morning we also heard about that not all of that infrastructure may be creating a lot of immediate value, which is something to be thinking about. And then I turn to health. Cities also create some of the worst health challenges in the world. Health is one of the biggest economic problems in the world. For example, the US government's off-balance sheet for healthcare, just for Medicare, is minus 71 trillion, while the US economy is worth plus 52 trillion. So from an economic point of view, the US is much worse off than Greece, just because of its future health bill, which the future generations have to fund. A lot of this is centered in cities, and we see the same in emerging markets, where people going from rural lifestyles into cities, and a lot of health problems percolate. Well, this is all very challenging. What we are seeing, the reason why we in our healthcare practice spend a lot of time on cities is cities are also one of the biggest solution for this. We saw an infrastructure solution before, but also we'll talk later about some examples, smoking cessation, many other things. Cities are communities, and they're one of the few hopes, other than employers, we have to actually fundamentally change healthcare in the world.
Thank you very much. And one of the key things that makes changes in cities possible is innovation. So Claire, is that what exactly is driving innovation in cities, and what's its role in making a thriving city?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Claire Cockerton. I'm CEO of a company called ENTIQ. I helped establish Level 39, which is a technology accelerator in Canary Wharf. And we work with entrepreneurs to help them connect with marketplaces, with clients, with investors, to help their ideas build the legs they need and also connect and scale. As an entrepreneur, I start with the presupposition that we need to create environments of exchange, and that helping free market dynamics flourish is a really important part of a thriving city. I think cities are these places of exchange, and not just exchange of goods and services, but exchange of ideas and exchange of finance. And so the best cities are creating the infrastructure to create these technology clusters where people come together and work together to build new solutions, to finance each other, to support each other. And I think London's been very successful at that recently with the start of Tech City, and it's been the result of our work at Canary Wharf, is creating this tech cluster where you are fostering a marketplace. So for me, supporting entrepreneurship is critical to any sustainable city. It's critical to building solutions that will address urban challenges. And I'd love to talk about the program we ran in Canary Wharf, if I can briefly. It's slide 5. As for those of you who don't know, Canary Wharf is a privately held property. It operates kind of like a mini city. It has its own transport, its own data centers, security systems, its own building information management systems. And what we did is set up a smart city competition. We attracted 36 companies from around the world to come and work within the heart of Canary Wharf. And we helped their businesses connect with investors, with mentors, and also with their end client. And in this case, it was Canary Wharf. Canary Wharf Group became a buyer of the technologies that they were trying to attract. And this revolutionized the way this real estate development company looked at procurement. So they started to procure from small and medium-sized businesses, which meant that we were attracting and cultivating entrepreneurs within our ecosystem, and they set their businesses up, they took big office spaces, and they associated their success as entrepreneurs with the very infrastructure that we were creating. And a little bit about this program is that we themed it across 6 different categories: building information management systems, transport, waste, energy, and through a competition process, sourced in 6 amazing solutions, which then became piloted on the estate. So even though this was a smart city competition, it was backed by a large corporate. This is something that cities need to think about doing on a bit more of a macro scale, that they become the buyers of these new technologies, and that we create clusters of innovation that are enabling a marketplace to happen. So the greatest cities, in my view, are places that encourage the free market dynamics, encourage investors, encourage entrepreneurship, and encourage engagement from industry players in order to bring the greatest solutions to the citizens of our cities.
Thank you. All right, now, James, given all that, is that if you're looking at it from the standpoint of London's office occupiers, who are among the most demanding clients going, and quite often have some of the most difficult to acquire space, what are the biggest challenges facing them, and what are they looking for as the economy grows and the businesses expand, which seems to be ongoing?
Okay. Look, just before I get on to that, a quick plug for what Claire and Eric achieved at level 39, because that was genius. It was brilliantly done. It's completely changed the perception of Canary Wharf post Lehman's in 2008. Very clever, and I look at that with some envy. So look, from the office perspective, there's two things that I'm hearing. The first is all about talent and the role that real estate plays in that, and the second one is about the very real and impending shortage of space, which is right on the doorstep. And this is important because real estate is an essential factor or economic factor of production, and businesses need that to work efficiently if they're to prosper. So just looking at that first one and talent, and talent for me is a more interesting one. It's the more relevant one to business because people can be, for a serviced operated business, that can be 80 to 90% of their cost. Get that working right and things really start to happen. And it's well understood and recognized that in the attraction and retention of talent, that the workplace is a really important criteria for people when they're deciding what jobs to take on. And actually we've seen that manifest itself over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. One of the really interesting features about this sort of market recovery has been how so many businesses have moved out of their core traditional locations, and I'm thinking of core Mayfair and core City, and actually ventured into these new villages, if you like. This is King's Cross, Shoreditch, London Bridge, and these all came about by huge or major transport infrastructure investments, things like HS1, Bridget, Crossrail, of course, and Thameslink, which is a huge improvement to north-south access through London. But it's not only superb connectivity, but it's also because these places offer something that's very dynamic, it's mixed use, it's edgy, and talent really likes being in places that are kind of culturally diverse. And actually so do corporates, because this is a great way of actually changing the perception of your brand into something that's much more progressive. The other thing, just to touch on talent, and I hope we come on to this a bit later, is talent likes to live close to its place of work. And right now, London somehow has to find a solution to this chronic shortage of space. And actually, the NLA just ran a competition, and they've just had the first entrance in yesterday, and definitely worth a look. Some of them I don't quite get, but you've got to have a look at it. But at the moment, housing is too expensive. And that's not just for the skilled workers who can go elsewhere, but it's actually for everybody else, because London needs people to make it work 24 hours a day. And that for me actually is that affordable bit that's so critical. Kevin, I'm just conscious of time, but so just briefly on this chronic shortage of space, and it's just worth going back to Lehman's in 2008. When that happened, businesses found themselves with this overhang of real estate. It was incredibly expensive. There was no way of getting rid of it. And it was a real kind of economic or accounting millstone. And for the first time, real estate went straight into the boardrooms, and they realized they had to do something about it. And memories of that have lingered. So whilst we've been through this economic recovery, I can't remember how long it is now, sort of 4 or 5 years, but whilst we've been through it, it's really the last 24 months that we've seen people really accelerate in terms of the amount of space they've been taking. And the real estate industry sort of sensed that caution. And while some people started building, we haven't built enough. So right now, depending upon, well, there's reports out there, but people are saying we could have up to 10 million square foot shortage of space over the next 4 years. Now, I think that number's actually exaggerated a little bit. What that does mean, though, is rents are going to go one way. We're hearing 25% over the next 4 years. That sounds about right. But actually, rental increases aren't such a big issue for corporates. Property overheads might be 6-7% of the total overhead. What's important is that it does mean that landlords or developers can demand longer leases and be more demanding on covenants. Now, again, for most businesses, that's fine. Where I'm really sensitive is we've got this burgeoning kind of technology knowledge sector, and some of these have got really thin balance sheets. They're in a highly kind of mobile environment, and they have to be able to move around. They've got to be much more agile, and being constrained by 15-year leases, they don't need that real estate risk. And I think I work in a great industry, but if there's one thing I think we could be smarter at, it's that.
And not penalizing them for if they grow very quickly, as tech companies do, or need to contract in poorer times.
Yeah, well, that's what the contrast in the debates is, that you've got stability, which businesses want, developers want, but at the same time, as we keep adapting, is that agility is essential, and you said it's innovation. And so now we need to talk about the talent part of the equation. We need to talk about the fact is that what attracts people to a city. And Duncan, you're the expert in say what.
Well, it's interesting. I did say I'd go slightly off piece on this, but what's fascinating just in this this conversation, I think the way you've constructed it is there's something in the way this is built up which actually speaks to the nature of cities. We looked back into London at the turn of the century, 19th century, and clearly there was a crisis, health, and it led to the vision of Bazalgette and the building of infrastructure that allowed the connection of Westminster to the City of London. So it formed a greater economic conurbation, if you like, that worked. But what wasn't on your slide actually is quite interesting, is just above the embankment, which was reclaimed land in the Thames, was built the Savoy and Shelmeck's House and this extension of Covent Garden. And actually it's that repositioning and regeneration of cities that's driven through its expansion and technological change, which is very, very interesting. And there's something about identity that's formed through that process, which is fascinating. If you Google London and go images, I'm guessing that the doorman at the front door of Savoy will pop up there pretty quickly in that sort of survey. And if you then look forward to Canary Wharf, which was, if you like, how to repurpose what was once the economic driver of the UK, which was trade, international trade to the British Empire through goods, and obviously there's a huge amount of labour, manual labour caught up in that. And then Canary Wharf has taken that as the nature of work and the nature of wealth creation has changed into the creation of Canary Wharf, which employs a significantly denser number of people in that area that was once for goods. And the interesting thing about Level 39, which we had the privilege of working on at the very beginning, is actually that is a floor plate in a 1980s building that was designed to service the financial banking sector and is now the epicenter of fintech in the world, actually. And who would have thought that would have happened? And what it's done is it's created and attracted the talent that needs to be in cities, but it's also co-located and given access to this amazing customer base, actually, the banks that are around there. And what's fascinating about London, if you look at that trajectory that it's been through, is effectively it's repurposing and rebuilding on its existing pillars of industry, whether it be finance or insurance or media or tourism. And I think it's that dynamic change which is very, very important. The bit I think that makes cities great, which is something slightly more kind of esoteric, I think, is this idea of identity. And it was touched on a little bit this morning, it was touched on a little bit at the dinner last night, which is kind of social capital. But I think it's more relevant, which is this sense that you belong there and that you are part of it. And while cities are difficult and they're challenging and they have all those issues and expensive that comes with it, it's the sense that you're actually part of something that's changing, that's exciting, that's actually making a difference, actually, making the world a better place to be in. And I think that's why the great cities of the world, they sustain themselves over time, because it's about people at the end of the day. It's the people who make cities work. All of these other pieces are really about facilitating people to be the best that they can be with environments that suit the type of work or the type of lifestyles that they want to have at any one time.
Right. And one of the things we're discussing that lead into this is that London, which is the city we're using as the model really for the panel, since we're all here and because everybody can connect to it, is a city that has gone through waves of we would say, both greatness and decline. And London and its population right now is just getting back to the level it was right before World War II. And this is a pattern that's repeated itself. New York went through this similar decline, 1970s, before coming back. It's only the newer cities that you've seen this profound growth. But as people move, as people are looking for these opportunities in London, they have to be coming from somewhere. And so what's going on in particular is where are people seeing these opportunities, And it's only certain cities that are really doing well, not just London, what's happening there.
But there's very different patterns, actually, because
Yes.
something like 30% of people working in London were not born in the UK, let alone born in London. Whereas that would not be true in some of the other great cities. So if you go to Manchester, you'll have a higher proportion who were born either in Manchester or at least in the UK than you would do in London. But what's interesting is that all of the major cities, the larger cities in the UK, have all seen a renaissance. And I would say that all of this, post really the beginning of the 90s, was part of an economic resurgence for the country as a whole. And when the country is doing well, cities will do well, actually, because they are the centres for innovation, because that's where the ideas are being generated, because that's where people want to go. And so long as you've got the right resilience in your infrastructure, which comes back to the resilience point, that you can actually do that. London found it relatively easy. I wrote a book called Reinventing London a couple of years ago, and one of my key themes was about that shift. We moved 1 million jobs from the outskirts to the centre of London. The 1 million jobs on the outskirts were in manufacturing, and there were more than 1 million created in the centre, in services and related kind of activity. You need infrastructure capacity to be able to do that. Other cities found that much harder because they didn't have that spare infrastructure available.
So once again, it's that the fact that the capacity was built up well in advance, and
By accident.
by accident, but the fact is it still remains. And that issue that comes up is in terms of connectivity, as you're saying for innovation, is that what is it that particularly that the innovators are looking for? What do they need in these cities that clearly some cities have and some don't?
Sure. Well, first off, they need great infrastructure, as we've talked about. They need affordable office space. They need access to affordable housing. And we've seen these clusters now pop up as far as Croydon and Stratford and beyond, all across the outskirts of London. Now, London's becoming a nice big hug rather than this central, smaller city mile. So we need great infrastructure and access to space. Entrepreneurs need access to talent. So they need to be able to hire great interns, for example, from the local university. They need to be able to hire great non-executive directors from big industry that's close by. They need a marketplace to showcase their technologies, their businesses. So they need proximity to their buyers. They also need a consumer base which is willing to adopt and try new things. And in London, we're really good. We fancy ourselves first movers, so we're willing to try out the new app. We're digitally savvy. We're off the charts on e-commerce figures. So it's a good marketplace to try and to test out. I think socially and culturally, you also need an environment where you can test out your ideas, where you can fail sometimes, and where we do champion the entrepreneur and we champion the great ambition of starting your own business and working on it for a while. So those are some of the things that we need. We also need access to capital. So cities and countries which have great enterprise investment schemes or tax incentives for investors and for entrepreneurs to issue share options. Those schemes are really important to attracting the right kind of investment into our cities.
Great. So now, to go along with that is that as the cities are innovating in the private sector, from the public sector standpoint, is that what can be done in cities that countries are having difficulties with? And what kind of changes, especially in the health sector, do cities provide a great lab for?
Yeah, healthcare is really a fantastic lab for this kind of thing. And because countries in the past, if you just pick your favorite or your most hated 3 past health reforms, which you can remember from the news, they probably all have to do with something which is kind of just being insured or delisted. They all have to do with building other hospitals or closing hospitals, etc. And what we are seeing, we have spent now the last couple of years with a global research think tank, with the World Economic Forum and some others, on this question. What we are seeing is that fundamentally we need to change the model altogether, and we need to get essentially other sectors than the healthcare sectors to fix the healthcare sector. The reason is that fundamentally risk factors such as lifestyle shape health much more than whatever you can do in the hospital. Once people arrive in the hospital, it's often too late. And as you painted the picture of cities in the past, so many people died and they needed to just bring in more people. Hospitals are the perfect picture even today like that. So what can cities actually do? We are seeing a number of really, really interesting experiments. There is, for example, a quite holistic approach here in London with the mayor and the London Health Commission. Big report last year on all sorts of pieces. One big theme in it was, for example, smoking cessation. New York, Chicago have shown over the last decades an unbelievable reduction in smoking. And if you manage one smoking cessation case at age 50 has a kind of lifetime benefit for, if you wish, the health system around that. A second big theme which we are seeing, which is kind of counterintuitive but kind of obvious, walking is a good thing. Making cities walkable and bikeable is a fundamental lever for health. And some of my favorite policy innovations in that area is Massachusetts has stopped to subsidize roads which don't have a bike path next to it. But basically no state subsidy at all for if you don't have a bike path next to it. A third area is a harder area, but is in the area of food and food regulation, because you don't only need the city itself, but you need to have food systems, restaurants, etc. But there are very interesting private-public partnerships. One is by the Musk family, which again is entrepreneurially ahead, starting learning gardens in schools and healthy restaurants at the same time in certain cities in the US. It's too early to see the overall aggregate impact of those, but these are very, very important experiments. What are all these examples? And there are many more other examples. Another example which I should mention is some cities in the world, such as Singapore, create data connectivity. So try to move their model of healthcare delivery away from what I would call outbound medicine, from inbound medicine, which is we wait for somebody to have a symptom and then inbound we do something, to outbound medicine, which is we are measuring in a population who might get sick. And for that, you need to essentially connect data sets, which this country and London in particular is also trying to do. Northwest London in particular, Manchester as well. And these are all, and what you can do if you have this rich data set connecting data from all sorts of sources, you can kind of identify people who are more at risk and intervene preventively. An example would be type 2 diabetes. Other examples are in the public health domain. So, for example, we know if you take a tube from Westminster eastbound, you lose 1 year of life expectancy at each tube stop. And avoiding taking the tube doesn't change that. And we need to deal with the public health challenges postcode by postcode now. So if you take these 4 examples, the promise cities really have, and from what we can learn from success examples, is that cities actually are quite providing something which in making health interventions, I don't mean only healthcare, but health interventions, more effective, which is communities. In order to really shift risk factors, you can't just do individual targeted interventions and hope that will work. Kind of need to do it all. And the only hope you have is if you shift entire communities. There is my favorite story on that is the community of Colac in Australia. It's a city of about 150,000 people, childhood obesity levels skyrocketing. The entire city said enough is enough, we want to change that. And every single adult and every single school and everybody had to do something. So a lot of the adults essentially people became sports coaches in the afternoon, all the schools closed the vending machines, etc. They did hundreds of things, literally hundreds of things. And the reason why they sustained that over a long period is the entire city the entire community was involved, and it's kind of the neighborhood watch type effect. Mm-hmm. And it's the only city on earth where all children, literally all children, have improved their health status, like lost obesity, sustained it over many years. And the promise of cities is creating these connected communities who improve their health together and not just hope for somebody else to fix the hospital.
Thank you. But it brings up something I think that's really important about lifestyles in the cities, is that one of the key things in attracting and retaining talented people is that you need to have a place, as we've said more than once, for them to live affordably. How do we do that, especially given some of the constraints in a number of cities and building new housing stock and development? And how do we find a place for families in particular to raise healthy and happy children?
Yes, well, that's a conundrum I think that the government's facing right now. So London itself is forecast to, conservatively maybe, to increase its population by 2 million people by 2030, which, to put that in context, is the equivalent of bringing the entire city of Birmingham and putting it on top of London. So it's a significant population increase. And it's been compounded by chronic underbuilding, actually, for many, many years. And in many ways, London had managed decline, planned decline, actually, as people moved out to the suburbs. And we've seen this sort of change in cities, as we talked about, in terms of a real desire to cluster and to spend time co-locating between places of work and places of endeavour and places to meet friends and hang out and culture, all those great things that make cities happen. But there hasn't been the housing component that's been there to support that. Now, I think that there's the sort of the spreading the butter over the city strategy, which has a certain amount of credence to it, and I think the GLA in particular has put together various densification plans and others. But the fundamental numbers are so huge that you need to look at strategic areas to increase the size of the city. And a city like London is constrained. You have a green belt, and no one really wants to go out into the shires. We also have a blue belt, which no one talks too much about, which is the city is capped by its height due to aviation and Heathrow and City Airport, and certain key views to places like the St. Paul's itself. But I think there's also, I think, an understanding of what kind of housing should we be building today. And I think this is where cities are very interesting, is that where they face a problem, they find a way around it somehow. And I think there's something happening with the talent, particularly in the sort of the younger generation. I kind of feel like I'm slightly outside of it now, but where actually there isn't a desire to sort of lay down roots and get on the equity ladder. Actually, I want to be able to live somewhere where I can leave in 6 months. Actually, not too dissimilar to a business. I want to be able to move to San Francisco to work on that project at some other place, somewhere else that provides me somewhere. Actually, I need a very small amount of space. And so we've seen some very interesting innovations in the idea around micro-housing, PRS housing, targeted at entrepreneurs, young professionals up to 35 and beyond. I think the big challenge is around family housing. And we're seeing that sort of the stretch of the nuclear family is becoming problematic. And I think you see the really difficult end of that spectrum is the hollowing out, which we talked a little bit before, of cities where actually migration is a big topic today. But economic migration from within Europe itself, upwardly mobile young professionals leaving their sort of their families in third-tier cities, wherever they are in Europe. And then you have that aging population that doesn't have that connectivity to their families. And I think that's a long-term health risk, actually, in many ways. So I don't think there's a silver bullet as such. I think the fact that it's now being raised as a city risk, a threat, I think if the affordability of a city becomes so much that it can't sustain its young talent and it goes somewhere else, well, that's the death knell for a city. And I think London is mobilising around those issues, but I think there are certain legislative issues. I think effectively housing is taxed for the right reasons in many ways. You build a housing development and you provide X amount of affordable. And that has maybe the unforeseen consequence, which is, well, I'll build a lot of very, very expensive housing to pay for the affordable. And again, the piece in the middle, which is actually the real city, is getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. So I think there's some fundamental issues around the type of housing, the size of housing, and who's living in it. We're still using housing standards, I think, that are slightly idealised in terms of what a family unit really is in a city. And I think those things need to be challenged and explored. And then strategic groupings of land, maybe with sort of city or government intervention to create those circumstances for real building.
Both of the interventions, yours and Nicholas's, require leadership.
Yes.
Okay, they require the city to be able to bring these issues together and to create the consensus which make it possible. Whether you're I can't remember the name of the town in the city in Australia. Yeah. And that is actually really problematic, particularly in the UK system, less so in the US system, because traditionally well, certainly over the last 100 years or so, we have infantilized city governments so that they do what they're told, and all the decisions are being made in different silos. Education is here, health is there, housing is there, roads are somewhere else, public transport somewhere else, all run out of Whitehall. And the real revolution, I think, is the commitment to devolution, which is now occurring in our political system. I remain sceptical, I've seen this before, and then when I see the detail of this devolution, they give it with one hand and they put it back, the civil servants will put it back with the other hand. But I think we have more momentum behind this than we've had before, and mayors are a real... We would not have got Crossrail through without a mayor, because that was a figure around which it could the campaign for Crossrail could actually coalesce. And without that, we would have lost, because we'd have just had divide and rule from all the different departments. We're now seeing that in Manchester. Bristol is a very interesting place, has a mayor, has a good tech sector as well, a lot of creative people, a good university, which 2 universities actually, which do that. So you can make these connected decisions in a city. You can't make them at a country level.
Right.
Kevin,
All right, James, you've got a key point.
Well, sorry, can I come back to Bridget in a second? Just about that housing thing, I mean, just to give you an idea of scale, I think we're currently building 20 to 25,000 units maximum a year in London, and we need a minimum of 40,000.
Yeah.
So we've got to double it. And it's, you know, it's not the housing in the middle, you know, the high wealth ones, they're not the issue, they're easy. It's those kind of the middle, and actually we're delivering affordable housing, we're doing that reasonably effectively. Which is so important. It's that kind of mid-range thing for most of the workers, which is proving so challenging. And your point about wanting flexibility, it's the private rented sector which is desperately trying to get into the market, but it's struggling because of simple economics. It's you can pay much more for your land if you build tall, high wealth apartments, or you make tiny units. But creating family housing and creating housing to rent just isn't as economically efficient as creating housing to sell, so that's a challenge. Devolution, 100%. Just look at what Sir Howard Bernstein's done up in Manchester, completely transformed it. I don't know the detail of how it was all structured, but he was a man who was business friendly.
And a political, it's Richard Lease, it's the double act actually of the two of them.
Completely, and both trusting each other.
Yeah.
And actually they had to do something because, I'm not being glib, there was a bomb and they had to step up and do something. And the way he has transformed that perception of Manchester and made it business friendly, creating vitality, has been fantastic. And actually Birmingham, I'm not sure which is our second city, but Birmingham has kind of been behind the curve on that, but they are now beginning to get it right. They've got a harder place to work from because they've got 3 concrete inner ring roads, and it's a difficult thing to work with. But over the last year, we've seen both HSBC and Deutsche Bank agree to major relocations there, and that's because of connectivity and the promise of HS2, and I do hope that happens in some guise.
It will.
I think there's enough political, where it goes, I'm not sure, but I think it's going to happen in some form.
It certainly goes to Birmingham.
It will certainly go to Birmingham, yeah. Sorry, so just on that, it was a promise of HS2. It's because there's proper business infrastructure there, and actually it's the availability of workers at a much less cost as well compared to London.
And Claire, you're talking, just to pick up the connectivity angle.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to pick up the devolution of power as well. It would just be huge for the tech sector if city councils were able to procure from the SME community, if they were able to essentially have more budgetary control to cater to the local needs of the business community. I think to add to that, there's this big global trend that cities need to develop their own identity. And one of the things that we did at Level 39, although it's a little, sort of Canary Wharf is a little microcosm for this, is create a narrative for London, but also for the UK around fintech. We started to own a little bit of a specialism as a nation. And then that prompted the creation of Innovate Finance, the new trade body for fintech. But I think cities now need to think about what their USP is on a global scale, what their narrative is, and wrap it around their academic institutions and those specialist labs and their social and cultural environment. And I think cities need to think about what their narrative to the world is going to be, what their unique marketplace is going to be. And in London, we're very good at fintech, we're very good at media technology, and we have our own portfolio of industry assets. Mm-hmm. More and more cities will need to think about being connected to other cities to create effective trade and investment mechanisms, to create expansion opportunities for businesses within that city elsewhere. And I think along with the devolution of power, you're seeing cities now participate in a global conversation rather than a sort of national conversation of how does the UK compare to the US. We're talking about how does London work and trade with New York, and creating these city connections rather than these sort of national connections. And technology is obviously a critical factor in enabling that connectivity on a global scale.
Bridget, we talked a little bit before we came in about the third tier cities, the ones that aren't linked in, so to speak, that either they lack the rail links or they lack the communications link or some sort of connections. What's happening in those cities? What kind of challenges are they facing, especially as the talented people move to the places where they have these connections?
I think their challenge is to connect themselves to a nearby bigger city. I'm not going to say we should close any of them down, because somebody I know who did suggest we should close down Middlesbrough actually got death threats as a result. Don't want to go there. But nonetheless, there are some real challenges for some of these, particularly places in the UK like Middlesbrough or Hull, places which don't any longer have the reason for existence that created them in the first place, steel or shipbuilding or coal, for example, and South Wales is another example of those challenges. So what you don't want to do is see everything sucked out to a faraway city like a London. But if you think about a Newcastle up in the northeast, or you think about Cardiff in South Wales, then you can say, but you have to be willing to collaborate. Yeah. And there's been a lot of challenge given, the one I know best is the northeast, because I sat on an independent review for them. And our real challenge was to get Middlesbrough and Sunderland to recognise that actually working with Newcastle and Durham was a better place to be than fighting each other, which is what they have traditionally done. So again, we created a system where it's all about need. So you get public money if you're needy. So let's maximise our need, and let's make sure our needs are bigger than your needs. And then you fight for the funding on that basis. And the idea that actually wasn't the right way to go, that growing your own potatoes was a better place to be, rather than, and this is what Richard and Howard realised in Manchester, that would actually be more successful. But there's still a lot of contention in some of those, and getting the joint authority to work in the northeast has been a real struggle. But the more that you can get the cities themselves to work together, so Sunderland, Middlesbrough, Hull, thinking about Newcastle, thinking about Leeds, and so on, that's where they need to be. What they can't do is be really successful in their own bat. They have to effectively accept that there's a kind of a dormitory, a suburb type role, in which you can be very wealthy in. Mm-hmm. You can still, if you earn the income somewhere else and bring it back. I come from Surrey, I come from the commuter belt. So that's how we operated. Everybody went, the rich people went and worked in London, and they brought back the income and spent it in Weybridge. We had an aircraft factory as well, it's true, but that's gone.
That's right. A lot of those factories are gone from a lot of places. One thing, though, doubling back in terms of migratory patterns, is that we brought up the fact that there's 30% of London is from outside the UK. And one of the patterns that's really been happening with a number of cities throughout Europe is that the talented individuals, the people who can move, including a lot of the younger talent, are leaving those cities and leaving those countries entirely and going somewhere else. So what happens to those cities? What kind of challenges are being faced by them, and how do they loop themselves back in? And even from a health and lifestyle standpoint, where do we start with that?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges in those communities is obviously a shifting age balance, and then you have essentially a huge long-term care problem, etc. And so not enough, people, even if they invent care robots one day, which is probably a few years away,
Japanese are trying.
How
sound
to
very
think about.
attractive, does it?
Doesn't sound
No.
very attractive, but in some of these places probably required. I don't think there is one thing which we are seeing in places like that is programs. One of my favorite programs on that is I would call it flippantly kind of 70-year-olds help 90-year-olds, which is essentially recruiting. Literally recruiting people who are retired but look for something to do, to essentially help out in their neighborhoods on care. And believe it or not, there's even an Uber-type model which is being conceived as we speak to organize all that, even for urgent care, which is it could be global very fast. With very interesting, and London and Dubai are really participating in that actually. So you could come up with quite new models of that, but I think the fundamental question you're raising is what happens if you wish the connectivity moves to a few winners, is leaving losers behind, and we need to think it about. And I think there the question really is, what can technology and other factors do to connect up, and then how attractive is it really to live in yet another supersized city? And what we are seeing in our global analysis, we have focused a lot on London and its particular circumstances here, and they may be quite unique actually. What we are globally actually seeing is actually that the mid-sized cities, from 150,000, which are not yet kind of 10 million, actually growing much, much faster than the cities which are already 10 million plus on a global scale. And that may have to do with, at some point, it becomes quite hard to kind of grow from where you are.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the relationship between density and wages, for example, across London and the rest of the UK. I'm not seeing that topping out. So, and London itself, well, at least the administrative bit, is not yet 10 million. So, I agree with you, there should be some cap to it, but I haven't yet observed it in any European city. So whether there's, but I think it is about how you, and London is actually is not dense by many standards actually,
right.
whether on housing or employment actually.
Right.
So you could, I think there's a lot of scope to have a livable city which is denser than it is currently, and which would still be an attractive place to live. Whereas if I go to some of the really mega cities, the 14, 15, 20 million, depending on how you count their hinterland, they feel too crowded, they feel over busy, they feel inefficient, that they've gone over that tipping point, if you like. You can't move around effectively, you have too many people.
And partially because their basic infrastructure has been designed for at best 5 million or something.
Yeah, exactly. And to reinvent that is really difficult.
Well, speaking of somebody who lives in Los Angeles, which has about 17 million in its metro area, I can feel that.
Yes, I feel your pain. And the smog. Well, that's not a healthy place. I mean, that's still the question of the kind of connectivity that you have. We've talked about walking, but there's also the public versus private transport. I mean, Los Angeles was built around the car in the first place.
Right.
Never had a public transport system, and now you're trying to reinvent one. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know that bit. Whereas London, of course, was built around a public transport system. London's great expansion comes when we invent the railway, and we enable people to live in these quite low-density places out in the suburbs and get on a train and come into the middle, and that's been the great advantage that we've had.
And Cairo was built for camels and has 8 million commuters in the day.
I was in Shanghai and they were talking about having to they want to get rid of the bicycles. Bicycles are old-fashioned, and we were saying, no, don't go there.
That's the really curious thing about Europe. You know, we've had this real growth, if you like, through the industrialised 20th century, mass production and factories and that sort of automation of processes. And it's kind of going full circle. And I think it's highly curious that the HS2 line potentially is on the old line up to Curzon Street, which was disbanded, taken out. It was inefficient. And that back in our cities, we're all about livable, walkable cities. The idea that actually I don't need a car, well, bicycles, fantastic. We've gone full circle. Well, that's the different issue, which is can you make the city safe for this new way of living healthier lives, actually. Healthier, more satisfying, more enjoyable lives within a neighbourhood that has real community in it. Speaking as someone who is actually a case study for this conversation, I'm actually from Middlesbrough, curiously. And
you're here.
I'm an economic migrant.
Yeah.
But my parents actually are actually still there. And what's interesting, I think, is this, as people are living longer, there is a very interesting kind of relationship, I think, between the grandchildren and grandparents, where there's a much stronger bond, I think, in many ways, because they can contribute a huge amount more. And I think finding places where actually you could recoalesce the nuclear family in some way, I don't know how, I think is a challenge which could create sort of better communities for us all. So whether it's up there or down here, but I think the idea of it being highly connected, and I think the big piece of this is not necessarily miles or distance, it's time. It's how easy or convenient, how much time do I spend actually between these points in my life. I think that's the bit that we can shrink down until the teleporter's invented. I think we're back on the rail and we're back on high-speed connectivity within city regions. There is, I think, another piece of this. I think you're absolutely right in terms of the local rivalries that have been built up over many, many years, medieval in some cases. We call it the sort of the Premier Leagueisation of boroughs, which is you're from Bolton, I'm from Leeds. We're 10 miles apart, but we kind of, we don't get on.
Maybe and actually, the problem is they don't realise if they don't cooperate,
well,
they're
Lancashire.
relegated.
But that's Lancashire and Yorkshire.
It is. But this is where this idea of a real sense of leadership, which is, and I think Birmingham's got this issue, which is it's not just Birmingham, it's Warwickshire. It's getting those Solihull to work together in a cohesive sort of regional fashion, where you do have these kind of 4 or 5 key regional government leadership, including London, that actually connects the UK together, and the UK works as an economic driver more as a whole. It's really curious when you get people who come, as we have clients from Shanghai, they'll jump on a train up to Birmingham. To them, it's not another city or a city region. It's an extension of the main conurbation in terms of distance and time. And I think we've got to look at the advantages we have, which is very dense areas of population that are actually really close together, and somehow having the leadership to connect and bring that cohesive action where you'll focus on this and we'll focus on this, and together we'll make the whole thing work better. And I think that's the piece that the national government really needs to step in on.
But national government has to step in to step out.
Yes.
And that's a real challenge.
Set the conditions for it to happen. Yeah.
James has been very patient here.
Sorry.
Not at all. I was going to touch on Premier League football.
No, don't talk about football.
No, actually, something that Nicolaus was saying and you did about people living longer. Actually, that is a break on releasing family housing, because it's a really inefficient way of using it, and I know it's a bit sensitive, but it is an issue. Kevin, something we haven't touched on really is education. Bridget, you mentioned 30% sort of non-domestic people living in London. If we're talking about immigration, I think it's a really good thing. We need it throughout the whole social scale. We need it for our diverse culture. But certainly to get the right sort of talent in, Claire, we're not producing enough of the right people, and education is playing catch up. And I think one of the really exciting things that's happening in London is look at some of our our greatest educational institutions. We've got Imperial that's moving a huge campus out to West London. That's going to be a huge catalyst to change out there. Yeah. We've got UCL trying to they're negotiating to take a big campus in the Olympic Village. Fantastic reuse of that wonderful thing we created in 2012. And we've got King's College trying to do exactly the same in Surrey Quays. And these are huge catalysts, and it's good for our economy in its own right, and it's really good for business. Business wants to be close to education, and for that reason, actually, one of our biggest assets is the Shard, and we actually brought Warwick Business School into the Shard, really because business wants to be next to it. They want to be completely accessible to that talent.
And for innovators, a lot of that spin-off is actually coming from education. It's a lot of the talented people who do these startups and otherwise they're connected to that. And how much is that?
Absolutely, and I think more and more the entrepreneurial journey is becoming a plausible one directly after graduation. So if we can create right next to the universities these opportunities
Imperial, they're building their own incubator, aren't they, for exactly that?
Yeah, for incubators and to encourage this and support the process of innovation that starts when you're in school, in the laboratory. If we can create these vehicles whereby what you put your education to use directly in industry and in starting a small business right after graduating. And I think if we can encourage that process and support it with financing and a great accelerator and great mentorship, That's really positive for the
Right.
And
economy.
get the schools right too,
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
mustn't leave the existing children
Yeah.
behind in all of this kind of thing.
Exactly.
And there's been a huge amount of work in London in particular to bring the schools which were really doing really badly. So they're now above average for the UK, which has been a fantastic achievement.
Yeah.
All right. Well, at this point, since we're about out of time, we could actually go on for another hour. But I think everyone would like to eat lunch. So as such, I would like to thank our wonderful panelists and thank all of you. And thank you for being here at the summit and for being here as part of this discussion. Thank you.